And I can already tell you it's going to be really difficult to not sound like a cliche broken record, but emotional decisions are really expensive. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten, and today we're talking about decision making and how to decide what's worth it when you work for yourself.
All right.
But first, I want to shout out Jonathan from our Spotify family who left a comment on the episode that we did about bankruptcy and said, "This was a topic I didn't know I wanted to learn about until you two covered it. Great summary of this taboo topic."
Yeah, man.
I know, right? I felt good about that. I felt like it's one of those words that people avoid because they think it's only for bad people or it's a bad word, and it's not. It's just a word. It's actually a legal process.
Yeah, but I mean, it is the cream of the crop. It is the definition of financial failure. And so I think that's why a lot of people just avoid it. But, you know, it was really about making sure that we at least gave people an understanding or an overview of what that process is. To his point, maybe removing a little bit of the stigma. You know, not necessarily encouraging it, but saying, hey, if you do find yourself in this situation, and I would imagine a lot of people might, just considering everything that's happening right now, want to make sure we were preparing people for worst case scenario.
Amen. All right. So let's talk about decision making, because we had two different reasons why we wanted to talk about this. They're kind of the same. But my first reason is because May, welcome to May, y'all, is Mental Health Month. And if you've ever worked for yourself, whether you identify as a freelancer, a solopreneur, a founder, an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or whatever it is, if you've ever worked for yourself, then you know that running a business can really mess with your head if you don't have a system to catch all of the feelings and all of the scenarios that you go through.
Yeah.
And mental health to me isn't just about how you feel. It's more than that. It's about how you're able to show up when the pressure's on.
Yeah.
Decision-making is one of the most important factors that determines your success or your failure in any business. And so I thought it was really important that we kind of shed a light on it.
Well, I would say also just the inability to understand how to think about making decisions is one of the most stressful things that actually lead to declines in mental health as well.
There's the episode right there.
It's true. But I will also say this, right? I don't want to feed into the stigma that being an entrepreneur is super stressful and, like being a traditional employee isn't, right? It's a different type of stress because it's stress all around. Like, so stress is unavoidable. I think entrepreneurship is stress that you choose. Mm-hmm. It's something that you design. It's something that I think you have a much better shot at actually alleviating. It's a lot easier to fix something that you designed than operating inside a system that was not designed with any of your needs or desires in mind. And so I will say that because I don't want people to be discouraged at all. But one of the reasons why we also wanted to talk about this is because we did actually just talk about this when we were in Kingston, Jamaica a few weeks ago for the Grow Your Wealth conference. We had, first of all, such an amazing time there. We met so many people, entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs. I love seeing the creators, and they were like business owners at all different stages that were there, which I was really excited about. But we basically walked them through decision making. That was the root. That was the primary focus of our talk. And we walked them through some very real examples that we had to go through, examples that we would say were decisions or junctures at different stages of our entrepreneurial journeys. And it was a lot. It was like funny. It was cringeworthy. And I was really glad that the audience responded both in person and online the way that we wanted them to. And when it was all done, we opened it up for questions. And there were like a handful of questions, but most of them were like, all right, so what do I do? Right? Like, can you give me a one pager? I think someone literally asked for a one pager.
Can you just summarize what you said in an hour on a page?
Yeah, how to be successful, avoid mistakes, and make sure that you make as much money as possible on one page. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. But this episode is probably like the closest thing to it if you weren't at that talk. And so, I wanted to make sure that we tackled that a little bit. And I would say that the approach that we took in that talk is similar to the approach that we've taken with lots of things. And I'll be the first one to say, I know it frustrates people because it frustrates here as well, because it requires you to think.
Yeah.
And what I have found is that a lot of people don't want to think. They just want you to tell them what you did so that they can replicate it.
Yeah, they want to react.
And that's not how life works, right? It doesn't work that way in sports. It doesn't work that way in business. It doesn't work that way in relationships. I can tell you, and we use simple examples with food all the time, which is probably a very early one of several examples that we will give because, back in the day, I used to cook a lot and share it online and people would ask for recipes. And I'm not trying to be an a-hole when I say this, but I can tell you exactly what I did. It's not going to come out the same.
Right.
It's not going to come out the same. You're going to get frustrated. Like there is an art and a science to cooking. There is an art and a science to business, just about everything. And so I can give you those steps. We can give you some pointers. We can share some perspective, but it does not mean that you're not going to have to think for yourself and figure out what parts of the advice, the counsel, or the evidence that we've given to you that you need to pay attention to and what parts you just need to ignore at different points throughout your journey. And so that's really what it's about. And hopefully we can help get more people comfortable with that reality by the end of this episode.
Yeah. I want to get people more comfortable with not only being willing to think, but the pace of thinking.
Yeah.
I think the unwillingness to think or the desire to just react to everything comes from being time starved. It's one of the biggest symptoms that you don't have enough time to do the thing that you want to do. And there's other ways to cure that. I promise you the answer is not in a productivity course or book or whatever it is that you've purchased recently. The answer is to make time. It's not to find it, it's to make it. And the reality is like, we're not as busy as we think we are. I remember I used to work for an executive who I would want him to think in front of me. I was trying to develop as a young leader and I would want him to think in front of me. So I would go into our meetings and in my presentations with these big questions. And he would say, give me something to react to. Like, I'm not here for all that thinking. And he had a right to. He's a busy executive. I am not under his purview. Like, he had a right to do that. But when it is your own business, you do have the right, but it's not advisable to always pay somebody to give you something to react to. That's going to be a very expensive habit.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. I remember one of the first pieces of advice that we got from mentors of yours early on, Rob and Janelle, shout out to them, who told us that entrepreneurship was basically a consistent cycle of feast or famine.
Yeah.
And at that time, it felt like a warning. It felt like it joined the chorus of other people who warn about how hard entrepreneurship is. But over the years, we've come to see it as that. We've come to see it as this rhythm and a natural part of running something on your own, of building something on your own. But income pressure shows up at every stage, whether you are broke, whether you're growing, whether you're thriving, whether you're coasting, and whatever season you're in, making good decisions about income is still going to be one of the hardest parts. Like, regardless of how you identify, I have identified as all the things that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode: a side hustler, a freelancer, a self-employed person. It don't matter. The decisions are always the same: what to sell, when to say yes, when to pivot, how to price. All of those things are decisions you have to make at every stage. And the pressure shows up to make the right decision at every stage, regardless of how bad you need the money.
Yeah. And I can already tell you it's going to be really difficult to not sound like a cliche broken record. But I mean, emotional decisions are really expensive. I think a lot of people are familiar with that idea when it comes to, let's say, buying a home. Right. That's this idea that you're shopping for a home and you walk into one and you see it and you just fall in love with the property and it doesn't matter. You're going to make it work to get the mortgage so that you can get the house that you think that your family and your husband or partner or whatever is going to grow into. And I get that feeling, but the same thing kind of happens in business because you will be tested emotionally and there will be good days and bad days. Chances are there's going to be a lot more bad days than good days. And again, I'm not trying to discourage anyone. I'm just being real with you. At the end of the day, at the end of the week, the month, the year, your journey, if all goes well, it's all going to lead to a favorable outcome for you, right? So you can't really look at it that linearly, in terms of like, there's been so many bad days, this must not be working. Like, it's just not that simple. But if I were to think about, some of the things that I wish people would have told me, or, some of the counsel, like in addition to respecting the fact that there's feast or famine, going back to the example with the house, like just because you got the house, you got the mortgage, does not mean that this was a good deal. Does not mean that you were somehow successful. And I'll be honest with you, I cringe every single time I see someone that I know likely doesn't have it like that, but they're celebrating and wanting the fact that they got the house to be celebrated, on social media. I see the same thing happen with entrepreneurs all the time. Just because you had a great year does not mean that you are doing things really, really well, but people act as if they're doing really, really well. Conversely, just because things aren't going as great as you imagine does not mean that somehow you're just not a good entrepreneur, that you don't have good business or your partners or whatever it is. Like it's just not that black and white. You know what I mean? And I know we want it to be, because that certainty allows us to feel confident, especially if it leans into the answer or the solution or the bias that we're looking for. But it's really just not that simple. At the end of the day, it boils down to certain decisions in certain moments, and every single one of them feel urgent, right? Like if we don't do this, we're not going to unlock explosive growth. Or if we don't do this, everything is going to fall apart. And the unfortunate truth and reality is that neither of those are likely true.
Yeah, right? They feel urgent, but that doesn't make them urgent.
Sure, you want that thing to go right so that everything else behind it, all the failures, all the L's that you collected are somehow wiped away. Or conversely, you want to make sure that you act big right now because you don't want to be embarrassed, and you don't want to deal with the egg on your face. You don't want to have to deal with the notion that you may be perceived as some type of failure. You know what I mean? That you were silly for even doing it at all. But it's just not that simple. I'll give you one quick example, and this is something that we shared when we were in Jamaica. We were faced with an ethical dilemma a few years ago, which is basically you are being offered an opportunity to make some money. And in our case, it was collaborating with a brand that on paper, we would have said is likely not aligned with our values. And we could have very easily said, absolutely not. This is against our values, and stood on principle and said, no, we're not going to do this. And we decided to sit on it and think about it and wait 48 hours before we even responded. And we talked about it over and over again. And then we realized, you know what? Let's do it. Let's see what happens. Let's build in some contingencies. Let's build in some backup plans just in case things don't work out. But we can't make such bold blanket assumptions. It's very easy to do that when you're not an entrepreneur, but when you are an entrepreneur, it's difficult because it's not theory anymore. It's very real. We're talking about real money. Long story short, we did the deal and it was great. It was great. There were no issues. Nothing happened. There was no backlash. There was no loss, no nothing. No one called us out for having collaborated with a brand that we were once critical of. Like it never happened. A year later, we were actually contacted by a nonprofit organization, one who was like the opposite, right? Like cream of the crop, one where it's like, oh my gosh, finally, we get to work with you guys because you have been on our vision board. And like, there's no brand that is more perfectly aligned. And they were a nonprofit organization that checked all of the boxes. We even lowered the quote because it was a nonprofit organization. When we got to the actual event, we found out that it was actually funded by the same company.
Sponsored by
the same company that was on our list as companies that, were not necessarily aligned with our values. And so all of that to say, even when you think you are doing the right thing, right? On paper, you're working with or working through an organization or a partner or doing something that is completely aligned with your values, you're doing the right thing, you're going to be faced with these kinds of decisions. And this is what makes, I think for a lot of beginners, this is what makes entrepreneurship so difficult and so challenging, and why a lot of people just throw in the towel. But as someone who's a little bit more seasoned, we've been doing this for a long time, I actually find it to be really fascinating and interesting. And it, after a while, it sort of relieves the pressure because you just become accustomed to this new level of complexity and really deeply nuanced and complex decision making. That's what wisdom gets you. You know, not to sound like an old head, but like that's what wisdom gets you.
Yeah. I think what we've learned is that good decision makers aren't just looking at the results. They're looking at the process that led them to that decision. And you hear this a lot in a cliche way, whether it's love the process or trust the process. But in business, it's for real. because you can do the wrong thing and still get paid.
That's right.
And you can do the right thing and still get paid or not get paid.
Correct.
It depends. And what you have to rely on is your decision-making process. It's chess, not checkers, or more accurately, it's more like poker.
Yeah.
I quote Annie Duke a lot, who is a author and a professional poker player who turned into a decision strategist. And she spent decades making high stakes decisions, literally betting millions based on a process that she has developed and trust about what to do when there's incomplete information. And her big insight is that in both poker and in life, we have this terrible habit of judging decisions based on what happened next. And if the outcome was good, we assume we made the right call. And if the outcome was bad, then we assume that we messed up. But when you're building a business or even just trying to sell a skill, you almost never have perfect information. In fact, they've kind of made that illegal and called it insider trading or whatever it is. But you are betting on incomplete signals every single day. Yeah. And there is no one size fit all answer to those decisions. There is no magical one pager that tells you how to think through all of the nuances and values and triggers. You have to come up with it yourself. And what you're trying to do is learn how to build confidence to make decisions and take risks that you can actually live with, even if they don't go perfectly.
Exactly.
And that's, again, it sounds like a lot of jargon, but it's real. You have to get more comfortable taking calculated risks. We also told this story in Jamaica about our URL, richandregular.com.
Yeah, one of the very first decisions we ever had to make as entrepreneurs together.
Correct. What happened was we were just starting our business. We were bootstrapping and the perfect domain was available, richandregular.com for $500. Now, the slightly less ideal one, which was richregular.com, was available for $25. And again, we were bootstrapping. There was no income yet. And so we chose to buy the cheaper one to play it safe. Well, fast forward a few months later, we were getting ready to attend our first major conference, which was FinCon. And we checked again, and the $500 URL was now $1,000, probably because we had been checking it to make sure it was still available. And we told this story during our talk, and we basically asked the audience what they would have done. And the answers were kind of split. Half of the audience said, I would have played it safe, save the cash. It's just a name. Like, it's an untested idea.
Right.
And the other half said, no, branding is everything. I would have bought it immediately. If it's available and meaningful, you go for it.
Step out on faith and, like, you're not bullish and what are we doing at all? Like, and we were literally having fun playing the audience against each other, because I think what it highlighted was just how many of us are just repeating cliches that we've once heard in the past, but a lot of people don't actually have real examples where they've had to use their own money or where real money was at stake. And so that's the real valuable insight that you want. And they were really surprised by what we actually did. It was legitimately split. They didn't know what we were going to do because we were listening to them and saying, you're absolutely right. You're right too. Right? You should be bootstrapping. You should be mindful of spending the money. You should be willing to play big. And then what do we do? Right? Yeah. What do you do with that information?
Yeah, we didn't tell them before we asked them, but it was a really good exercise because they were both right. The way that you answer this question depends on how you think about risk. There is no singular right answer. You can pay $1,000 and things turn out fine and you make hundreds of times more of that money in the future, or you can pay the $500 and you don't have the story to tell. Either way, you're both right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what it taught us in that moment was how debilitating fear can be. And it allowed us to actually quantify our fears, because looking back now, if you weren't willing to spend $500, and I hate to sound cliche, but I'm going to say it again. Maybe it's not even cliche. It's like, I hate to sound like one of these internet personalities, right? But if you're afraid to spend $500, then you're likely not prepared to make $5,000, right?
I don't know that we'll get into that later.
Well, I do think that there's just something to it, right? There is a relationship between risk and reward. You will not be able to unlock your wildest dreams by playing it safe. That much I know for sure.
That is true. There is a relationship, but only after you've thought about everything clearly.
Correct. And so the lesson of that particular decision, and the lesson for anyone that's listening and or watching, is really around, to your point, around the journey and the process, and preventing yourself from thinking too small, right? That is what we see more often than not as more prevalent. And so we really wanted to offer up some advice on how to avoid doing that. And I think The first thing is around considering a broader range of possible outcomes. Our brains tend to jump immediately towards the thing that we completely dread or the thing that we are completely most excited about, right? Very rarely are we prepared to even think about anything in the middle. And so one of the things that you can do, if I'm going to use an example around us getting a book deal, which I think was in 2019, that was a really, really big and important moment for us as entrepreneurs and creative people. But instead of asking ourselves why we were willing to leave our jobs and pursue this business, it was looking at it from the other side, like the other perspective, which is what is our jobs teaching or training us to do? Like, where do we envision ourselves going there? And we were very clear that we did not see this straight line up the corporate ladder, nor did we really want that. I think I certainly was clear that I didn't want it before Kirsten was, but we were just thinking about, aside from promotion and pay, like who it was actually teaching us to be. Could we honestly say that we took pride in what we were learning every single day? And the answer in most of those cases was no. So there was that. But the other thing that you can do to help prevent yourself from thinking small is kind of using the outside view and basically looking at what has happened to other people who've been in similar situations. And I think this is one of the primary reasons why people build networks or join communities, because it gives them exposure to other possibilities and other outcomes. They can better envision where their lives may be when they are surrounded by other people who might be 2 or 3 years above them. And the last thing that I'll mention is really around probability. And this might be a little bit more of a difficult way to think about if you're unfamiliar with like marketing and sales. But I've said this before, I'm sure, on the podcast, but there's a term called conversion, right? Which is basically if you are marketing or promoting something, you know that 100% of the people are not going to say, yes, I've been waiting for this thing. I want to buy it. A tiny, tiny percentage of those people are going to be interested in doing that. And what most people don't actually understand are what those numbers are. And world-class companies, like especially with things like email marketing and web commerce, like conversion is very, very low. We're talking about anywhere from 1% upwards to 3%. Like 3% would be world class. So for every 100 people that visit that website or visit that web page, that look at that offer, whatever it is, whether it's a product or a service, they look at that price, they read it all. World-class companies, like 3 people are going to buy out of that 100. And that's important because a lot of people, like they're making these decisions based on pure, random, imaginary, and like really hopeful numbers. And it's like, oh man, I at least half. It's like, in what world would you expect 50 of the 100 people who visited consistently saying, yes, this is something that I want to buy? They're going to find tons of reasons not to do it, you know? And so that's just a better reality, I think. And so we wanted to make sure that we shared that perspective with everybody. But again, like you don't want to be overwhelmed by fear and thinking too small. It helps to have some numbers to kind of right size your own expectations and help shape what your next decision may be. And I'm not saying that to say just stay positive. Like it's actually far more complex than that. I think it's really more of a matter of playing to win versus playing not to lose, which is a sports metaphor, but I think it's also true in business. A lot of times people are not getting the results that they want because they're trying and they're overthinking and they're building in all these safeguards. They spend more time trying to prevent mistakes from happening than they do from actually trying to unlock new business. And that, I think, is just a huge indicator of the fear that may still exist in that decision-making process and maybe leading people to not get the outcomes that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. To me, this is where the more spiritual part about running a business comes into play. And it's because of the amount of faith. And I don't have another word to use besides faith that you have to have in yourself, in your idea comes into play. That's what takes you out of that small thinking. That's what allows you to imagine outcomes that aren't just immediate or obvious. Like you were saying, even when it came to the book deal, we had imagined a book deal, but we had imagined it 5 years later than when it actually came.
Right.
We had imagined quitting our jobs, but we had imagined that 7 or 8 years later than when we actually did it. And so sometimes having that faith or that ability to look beyond what you think is immediate or obvious is the thing that breaks you out of that small thinking.
Yeah.
It's not just about budget. It's not just about money. And I think that's what reinforces the point around building a decision-making process that matches the size of what you're trying to create.
Mm-hmm.
Your decision-making habits should be big enough, bold enough, and thoughtful enough to handle the size of your future goals. I think that's what you were getting at earlier with the $500 investment versus a $5,000 goal. We're not saying that you should go out and spend a bunch of money just because you have a big dream. It's not really about blowing your budget, but it is about placing thoughtful bets and protecting that possibility, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's where the real tension shows up, because we can say that now because we've done it hundreds of times over the last 8 years or so. But every decision at the crossroads, whether it's about spending or pricing or hiring or selling or investing, feels bigger than it is in the moment.
For sure.
Like it is when the money is tight, or even when it's flowing, like that's when the pressure hits. That's when the decision-making process matters the most. But that's also the time where you're the most cloudy if you don't have it reinforced, if you haven't said that this is the reason why I got the good outcome, because I'm willing to take every emotional moment, every decision through this journey.
Yeah. Well, I also think it's important to recognize that it doesn't go away, and that's another thing that you only learn with experience. I think a lot of times we think, well, I'm still in that growth period. It's like, guess what? You're always going to be in a growth period.
Until you're in the dying period.
I hate to tell you.
Yeah, if you're not growing.
You're always going to be growing, right? And so you're just dealing with a different level of growth, right? Like you're going from not having an idea to establishing the idea to now surviving all of the failures and the struggles that you've made in the first 2 to 3 years. And then that turns into you now becoming a more mature entrepreneur. But like the actual complexity and the weight of the decisions don't go away. They just get bigger. And if you're lucky, you will always be growing into those decisions. Like otherwise you would have been able to predict the future and you wouldn't have been in the quandary to begin with. But that's always something that you're going to be faced with. And I think it's a privilege to actually come to that revelation. But I want to walk people through a couple of things because there are some critical decisions that I think are really, really common and prevalent for most entrepreneurs. And I think the first one is when to spend versus when to save. So you might be at that crossroad, right? Like you're not exactly where you want to be. You're trying to make the decision. Do I need to spend more in a way to unlock more revenue? Or should I just hold on to the money because I'm just not really sure what's going on right now? Things aren't really popping. You got all these reasons as to why you should not do it. And this is really about reframing that situation. Like, again, this rarely is this going to be either or. This is about reframing that. And the answer is always going to be somewhere in the middle. That's where some of your best decisions are going to come from. And I think the question you should be asking yourself, instead of believing that you shouldn't spend a dime because things are too tight, or, believing that, I just got to be balls to the wall and go for it because, insert any number of positive reinforcement there. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. And I think a better question you should be asking yourself is, which risk am I better suited to take or accept right now? Right? Like, what am I most willing to absorb if things don't go well? Or you can think of it like the glass ball juggling example, which, if you're not familiar with that, is imagine yourself juggling 3 to 4 glass balls. At some point, one of them is going to have to fall. Which one are you most comfortable falling, right? You can drop that one, but these 3 just can't fall, right? That is a much better way, I think, of thinking about it, because rarely are you going to be in a situation where the expectation is that you're just going to have to keep on going, or that the tension is so tight that you're just going to be overwhelmed by the fact that nothing can fall. Like it's not going to be that simple, but you have to get comfortable saying, you know what, if this falls, so be it, for the time being.
Yeah, there's going to be a trade-off either way. Are you
Always
more comfortable losing money, or are you more comfortable losing momentum?
Yeah.
There is no frictionless path to your goal, but it is about you deciding which risk you're in a best position to take at that point.
I remember when we decided that we were not going to jump on the TikTok train. Right? Everybody was on TikTok and they were saying this was the new thing and it was blowing all these other channels out the water, and there are people who had gone crazy. And it was like, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was a place for us. I still stand by that decision. I think we actually are on TikTok, but there's nothing there. But we went ahead and secured the name. We can go. You can get on TikTok if you want to.
And we don't have our name. There's some little girl that has it. So.
Okay. Well, there's a rich and regular out there on TikTok that has absolutely nothing.
At least the last time I checked, I don't have the app on my phone.
To do with us. But the point is, that was rooted in just what felt right in that moment. And it was also rooted in, all of the other platforms that had come and gone that everyone said was going to be the next biggest thing. And here we are, even dealing with TikTok potentially being banned. It's just madness, So yeah, like you're always going to be faced with those kinds of decisions. Another one is around pricing. If you are in business, you have to put a price on whatever it is that you're offering, whether it's a good or a service. And again, we tend to look at this in very black or white issues. It's like, can't charge too much. You want to get people hooked and build volume. Or the other side is saying, you know what? Well, why get 100 customers when you can just get 2 to 3 customers that are all paying? Like, isn't that better? Like, isn't that what you really want to do? I can think of any number of entrepreneurs who are faced with that decision. And I think the better question to ask instead of either or, high or low, is what is my price attracting? Especially when it comes to your target customers, right? So if you are attracting a high expectation client because you're charging a premium, then you better have systems in place to nurture that client. If you're doing the opposite, and you are attracting customers who are like very needy and, they just wanted to spend $2 with you or something like that. And you don't have systems to kind of deal with that volume. You're going to just end up in a different set of problems. You're going to have a different bucket of problems. And so pricing is not just about how much money you make. It's also a reflection of the operations and the systems that you have. And to a certain extent, your personality, if you are going to be the person who is actually servicing these customers. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. And certainly I would say, if not the number one issue or crossroad that you're likely going to be faced with is when to hire, who to hire, right? Like,
or when to do it all by yourself.
When to do it, right? Like there's always going to be one voice in your head, one guru telling you that you don't need to be doing everything for yourself. You need to be stepping up and leveling up as a CEO and letting somebody else or AI deal with the minutia. And then there's always going to be someone else saying, hey, you should know how to do everything in your business. I mean,
stay lean.
I can literally think of successful entrepreneurs who have done both ways. And I think the better way to think about that and to navigate those kinds of questions or get through those crossroads is to ask what that hire or that hiring decision is going to unlock. And here's something that I know for sure. If you don't clearly understand, and I mean crystal clear, like this hire, how it's going to unlock something, whether it is efficiency or revenue growth, then it's probably not going to do it. Like the hire needs to specifically unlock it. And so if you hire a Swiss Army knife, someone who does a little bit of everything, you're going to get a little bit more of everything that you already have. You're not going to feel the result. But if you are looking to unlock efficiency, then that is what you need to be hiring for. If you are looking to hire for income growth, then that is specifically what you need to be hiring for. What happens is a lot of people are hiring to service their own ego. They're hiring because they've been told that that's what they need to do. It's another version of them stepping out on faith, but they don't actually have systems in place to actually train those people, to nurture those people. And then they end up regretting the decision. And then they just cast away the idea of hiring as a strategy towards growth altogether. It's hard. You know what I mean? And it is imperfect by design. All of it is. But I think a lot of it starts with just reframing the actual situation and finding that balanced perspective somewhere in the middle. I think that's more often than not going to be what you need to be doing to help get yourself out of it. But there is no perfect playbook to follow. You're writing your own as you go.
There is no perfect playbook. There is just a process.
That's it.
And the only way to sharpen your decision-making process is to get in that thing. It is as unique as your investor risk profile. It's like a fingerprint. Some people can stomach big moves and big swings, and other people need something smaller and steadier. But either way, you have to know yourself and design your process around that. It's not as simple as taking somebody's course or copying somebody else's playbook or paying for a business coach who promises XYZ results. Part of it is time. Part of it is surviving a few bad calls and learning from them. Part of it is having diverse experiences and different industries and different stakes and different outcomes. Another part of it is mentorship, having people who can see your blind spots faster and have the communication skills to be able to show you yourself in a way that you're willing to see.
Yep.
And then a lot of it is learning mental models, finding little shortcuts to figure out when to hire or what milestone you want or how to retain and attract key contractors or partners. Like, it is a combination of things. It's a perfect storm of things. And all of it starts with how you think about your business and how you talk about your business. Because at the end of the day, how you think about your problems is going to shape how you solve them. And a lot of people that we encounter talk about their business in very black and white terms. They're very sure about what the issue is. They are very clear on what is going right or going wrong. And they're not applying that nuance to say, well, I made this decision and this was the outcome, and separating the decisions that you've made from the business model itself.
Yeah.
Even the idea that this could be a one pager, like how to make decisions for a business, tells me that you think everything is supposed to be easy and repeatable. And again, that's not the point of a business. There are businesses that exist like that, where if you want an easy and repeatable thing to sell a widget, then go into manufacturing. And even that has a lot of variability.
Even that. Again, you have a literal recipe to make whatever you have, but I guarantee you're going to have some issues. You're going to have some breakdowns. You're going to have some delays. You're going to have some supplier issues. You're going to have some bad inspections.
Absolutely.
Like, it's just, nothing is that simple.
No, nothing is that simple. Some things can be filtered down to a framework, but a lot of it can't. And when you realize that your problems aren't just problems, they're actually mirrors. They're trying to introduce you to the person that you're supposed to become. You can't treat every decision as if it's life or death, or you're just going to end up moving scared.
Yeah. I am on the cusp of my Little League playoff coaching debut. Today is a really, really big day for my son's Little League team, and we're excited and nervous for it. And so I do have my coach's hat on at the same time as I'm having this conversation. And it's really interesting to me just how many of the parallels they are in business and in sports. I think it helps me understand why you hear and have so many motivational speakers kind of speaking to both or using examples from both, because you are fighting. And again, like, you could not, like, if we're just talking about sports for a second, like, that's like saying, well, tell me how to win a basketball game. Right? Like,
score more points.
Just listen, at the end of the day, you just need to score more points than the other team. And by the time that's done, if you can do that, you win. Right? Well, you got to play offense. You got to play defense. You got to know schemes. You got it actually
you gotta not get injured.
You got to make sure you don't get injured. You got to make sure you don't play too aggressively, because then you'll get fouls. You got to make sure that the coach is locked in. You got to make sure that everyone got a good night's rest the night before. Like, there's so many measurable and immeasurable factors that go into it. I mean, even down to the time of day. Right? Is it a 5:30 game? Is it a 7:00 game? Well, it just kind of depends. Is it in the spring?
Yeah.
Or is it in the fall? Because the sun tends to come down, and then that can kind of get in the kids' eyes a little bit, and only half the kids have sunglasses. Like, business is the exact same way. Like, it is that complex. And I think it starts with really wanting to be in it. And that's what I found. You have to really want it. Like, I'm grateful for the complexity, because it weeds out the people who I believe don't really, really want it. Like, there are a lot of people who I think started businesses for the wrong reasons. And that is revealed once they are dealing with these complex decisions or the inability to make those decisions, because you find that fear like very easily overwhelms them, and they end up crumbling. They end up making bad decisions, whether it's based on hubris or fear, it doesn't matter, but they just end up crumbling. And I'm grateful for that, because like, it makes it a little like the people who survive, like, as an entrepreneur who's been successful for a number of years, I don't know. I kind of like this tight knit group of people who have been here, because there are moments where you are surrounded by people, I think, who are just sort of pretending and playing along and acting as if it's super easy and selling people on snake oil tactics. And I find that as an entrepreneur, no different than as a coach, I find it to be offensive, like it's sort of disrespectful to the purity of this art and this science. And so, yeah, it just expect it to be complex, very similar to relationships. Like I'm not over here telling people, oh, you just need to, never go to bed mad. And then everything just magically sort of, goes well for 40 years or however long you want to be married. So there's that. But I also want to give a shout out to a friend of mine who I actually haven't seen in a long time, but I saw something that she posted on social media. She's a serial entrepreneur. She's a mom. She's done all kinds of amazing things. She posted this as she's going through her, who knows how many, but like, this is, the kind of person who's going through all kinds of businesses, like all kinds of things. She is a hustler, but she has always stayed above ground, like always, always, always. Doesn't matter what she's doing. 3 years from now, she'll be doing something completely different. She posted something. I doubt it's an original line. She might have just found it somewhere else on social media, but it made sense given the context of our discussion. And it was this: embarrassment is the cost of entry. If you aren't willing to look like a foolish beginner, then you will never become a graceful master. And that really resonated with me because so many people are just, like I said, unwilling to be embarrassed. And that desire to avoid embarrassment outweighs their desire to actually achieve these goals, which is why they just allow the risk to overwhelm them. And they never really, really get started. I think it's true in relationships. I think it's true in business. I think it's true in sports. And so if you're out there and you're afraid, you're allowed to be afraid. That is perfectly normal. But if you have outsized goals, you have to have that desire be bigger than your fear. It has to be. And it doesn't have to always be, but like over time, that desire to succeed must overshadow and must outweigh the fear. If it doesn't, you will fail. You want certainty? I can absolutely tell you without question, unequivocally, you will fail. So you have to churn through it. You can't go around it. You can't go above, below. You have to go through it so that you can actually grow. That is what a breakthrough is. You got to break through, and then you can reap the rewards of whatever it is that you were working towards.
Yeah, it's painful. It's painful, but it's necessary. It's a necessary part of growth. I mean, if you think about growth in any realm, whether we're talking about nature or muscles, we explain this to our son because, to your point, as we're going through this episode, I'm thinking about all the lessons we've had to teach him in the last year and a half as he's coming into his adolescence. Growth requires some pain. It requires some pressure. A seed has to burst in order for the plant to come out. A butterfly has to burst out of a cocoon. Like your muscles have to split in order to grow. There's all these signs of growth, not just happening. That's just magical thinking. If you're actually interested in personal growth or business growth, you got to be willing to deal with some pain. And there's lots of ways that you can do that, but you have to be willing. It starts with that.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard and you want to help us grow, then go through the embarrassment of leaving a public review so we can shout you out on the podcast. Or you can drop a comment below to keep the conversation going. We will see y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.